Hi, everyone. It's Kendall again with Sager Family Farm. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be doing a garden exploration of the plants that are in my garden, but also some plants that I can find in my kitchen and in my neighborhood. So I kind of went everywhere for this garden exploration. Just in case you're new here, you can ask me questions over here, and I'll try to get to them at the end of the lesson. So if you have a question, you can type it over here and I'll read back through them. Only I can see your questions, so no one else can see what you're asking. So feel free to ask anything about my garden plants today. Sometimes I'll have questions for you and I'll ask them down here and I'll let you know when I do have a question, and then you can answer it as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. And today we're really going to look for all of the parts of a plant that we can eat. And it's pretty surprising that we do eat all of the parts of the plant. So I'm going to start out by showing you guys a picture of a little tomato plant that I drew over here. And let's start out by identifying all of the parts of this plant. And then we're going to look for the parts of this plant in my garden. So the first part that I want to take a look at is at the very bottom. And I already have a question for you. So it just popped up down here. So you can answer, what part of the plant is this? Are these fingers? Are they roots? Or are they strings? It is kind of stringy looking. Usually I find this part of the plant underground. So it's underneath the dirt. And this part of the plant helps the plant absorb water and nutrients from the soil. So this is something that the plant needs to live. So the plant needs water and nutrients. And this part of the plant is going to help it absorb that. And it looks like a lot of us are answering back. We all know that that is the roots. So these are the roots of the plant. And let's take a look in my garden. So I have some videos of my garden. And let's take a look at the first root that I'm looking for. So here's one of my veggie beds, and it looks like there's just a whole bunch of green stuff in there. And the tricky part about looking for roots is they're underground. So you really have to zoom in and take a closer look. So I'm looking closer to the dirt, and I can start to see there's a little orange part at the very top of the soil here. And if I pull this plant out of the ground, I can see the root. And this is a carrot. So a carrot is one of the roots in my garden that I eat. Of course, this one still has a little dirt on it, so I usually wash off the roots before I eat them. But a carrot is an example of a root that I eat. And there's actually a lot more roots that we eat. So I have another root growing in my garden. So let's take a look at this root. So we can see that this one, the leaves look a little bit different. But again, if we zoom in closer to the ground, so if we start to look at where the roots actually are, then we might start to see what kind of plant this is. I can see already a little red part right here. So what kind of plant might this be? So to see it fully, we can pull it out of the ground. So I pulled up this plant, and this is a radish. So this is another root that I eat, is a radish. And these ones, sometimes they're a little bit spicy, but I really like them. They're nice and crunchy, and I put them in my salads, or honestly, I just eat them plain because I like how crunchy they are. There are other roots that sometimes I don't have room to grow these in my garden, but if you don't have a garden at home and you wanted to go on your own garden exploration, you can actually do it in your kitchen. So I went for a garden exploration looking for roots in my kitchen, and this is what I found. So in my kitchen, in my cupboard, I usually have onions. So onions grow underground. They have a green part that's above the ground, but when I see them in my kitchen, they look like this. And here I have a yellow onion, a red onion, and a white onion. If we take a look at the red onion a little bit closer and kind of peel back some of the skin, I actually think it looks a little more purple. So I actually have a scavenger hunt worksheet on my website that you could do after this lesson. and I try to look for a rainbow of colors in all of the plants in my garden. And sometimes it's a little hard to find a purple plant, but I found red onions are purple. So you can mark that off in your colors checklist if you want to go on a scavenger hunt after this and look for plants of all different colors. So those are the roots that came to mind is carrots, radishes, and onions. And those are all roots that I eat. So let's go back and take a look at the next part of the plant. So the next part of the plant that I wanted to look at, it's highlighted in green here. And I've got another question for you. So I'm going to pop that up in just a second here. Is what part of the plant is this? Is this the stem? Is it a stick? Or is this just more roots? So this part of the plant is usually above ground, and it looks like it's holding up a bunch of other parts of the plant. So it's usually long and quite strong, so it holds up all of the other parts of the plant. So this is a crucial part in the plant's life. So this is definitely a part of the plant that allows it to live quite better. And it looks like a lot of us are coming in, and we all know this is the stem. So this is the stem, and the stem holds up all of the other parts. And now let's go through and look in my garden for some stems. Sometimes we might call this, if we found like a crispy stem, we might call it a stick. So it's definitely kind of like, maybe I'd call it a stick, but if I was describing a plant to somebody else, I would call this the stem. Because sometimes the stems are not always hard like sticks are. So a stick, like a tree branch, if I snapped off a little twig, that might be hard and crunchy. But for a tomato plant, they can actually be nice and soft. So the stem is how I would describe this part of the plant. So let's go into my garden now and look for some stems. Actually, let me show you some pictures of stems first, because I actually don't have very many stems growing in my garden. I do have one, but it's kind of a weird one. So let me show you some stems that we're probably more familiar with first. So these are two stems that I really like to eat. So on top, that is asparagus. And on the bottom, that's celery. So I usually like to eat my celery with peanut butter. And these are two stems that we might eat. And if you were walking around your neighborhood trying to look for this, maybe not too many people garden in their front yard, but sometimes they do. And I wanted to show you what asparagus looks like when it grows, because it looks kind of strange most of the year. So when the asparagus first pops out of the ground, it really does look like an asparagus. And let me draw over top of this. So right here is the asparagus that just popped out of the ground. And it really only looks like an asparagus stalk for a few days. And then it starts to grow these bushy leaves. So you can see over here, it almost looks like a fern. So something you might find like under a forest, like at the bottom of a forest. So it's really starting to look not like asparagus anymore. So most of the year, the asparagus actually looks like this. So that's what the asparagus looks like most of the year. It's only a few days where that stalk, you can chop it off and go and eat it. So sometimes I actually do see asparagus growing in people's front yards, but it's not in the form that I would want to eat it in. But it is a pretty cool plant, because this plant needs light in order to grow. So I can't always chop off the asparagus and just eat it every time it pops something above the ground. And this, now I want to show you my weird stem in my garden. So let's go back to see my weird stem here. And maybe you guys know this, because I actually learned about this plant as a kid and I loved it. So this plant right here, it actually, a lot of people view it as a weed, but I still let it grow in my yard because I know what it is. I actually only just recently learned the real name for this is wood sorrel. It's in the oxalis family, and I always used to call it sourgrass. So this is sourgrass, and how I would eat it, and actually I ate it like this today when I was filming this video, is you chew on the stem and it tastes a little bit like lemon. So it's this kind of sour flavor to it. And so that is sour grass. And so that is another stem that I eat. Not a very obvious stem, but it is a stem that I really enjoy. So let's go back to the parts of our plant and let's look at the next part, because I was talking a little bit about the importance of this part when we're talking about the asparagus. So this part is very important to the plant, and I have a poll for you guys. So a question that will pop up in just a second is, what part of the plant is this? So these ones help catch the sunlight. So plants also need sun in order to grow. So these parts are usually bigger and wider and help catch all of the sun to help that plant grow very long and tall. Sometimes when we grow plants inside, you see that their stems grow very long because they're this part of the plant, oh, I almost said it, but it looks like a lot of you are guessing, is really reaching for the sun. So it looks like everybody knows that this part of the plant, this is not the flower, it's not the petals, it's the leaves. So the leaves of the plant. And now let's go back out to my garden and see, where do we eat leaves? So I actually have some leaves growing in my garden. And here is an example of one of them. So we're kind of next to a bunch of other leaves. So we can see the leaf that I'm holding now, that's actually a carrot leaf. But then this leaf looks a lot different. And this plant is called kale. So you eat the leaf part of this plant. And that leaf was pretty big, so I usually don't eat it exactly like that. So when I want to eat kale, I usually have a colander or a strainer, so this bowl with holes in it, in my sink. I've got some water in there so I can rinse the kale, and I tear the kale up into little pieces. And then I can wash it, dry it, and then eat it in a salad. So I can put some sort of salad dressing on it. I can put my radishes in there. I could put some onions in there. So I could put a lot of different things in my salad. So kale is usually one of the leaves that I eat in my salad. There are more leaves that I eat though, and actually this is one that I grow in my kitchen. So I have a windowsill in my kitchen, and I have a few plants that I put on the ledge there. And this plant right in the middle is basil. So this is something that I might eat in a tomato sauce on my pasta. I might eat it on a pizza. I might use it to make some pesto. So I can make lots of different things with my basil leaves. And as you can see, I'm just growing it in a little jar with some water. So the roots are sitting in water, and it gets enough light from the window that I have there. So basil is one of the leaves that I eat, and I even grow it in my kitchen instead of outside in my garden. I do have a few more leaves that I eat in my garden. So let's take a look at another one over here. So here I have two different plants that I'm growing in pots next to my planter beds. And they look very similar, but they're actually a little bit different. So the plant that is on the right-hand side that I'm going to zoom in here and touch, this one is spearmint. So this one has a minty taste to it, but spearmint is usually a little sweeter than peppermint. So a little sweet, almost like, it's not quite like a candy cane. This other one is called lemon balm. Looks very similar, but the edges of the leaves are a little more jagged, so it looks like it has teeth around the edges. Lemon balm has kind of a lemony flavor to it. And both of those plants are plants that I don't usually eat the leaves. You can chew on the leaves, so you can use mint when you're cooking meat in a lot of things. Mint is usually very tasty with it. But I actually use these two in tea. So when I brew tea, I take the leaves and I put them in a teapot and I pour hot water over them and I let it sit for a little while, and then the tea takes on the flavor of the leaf. So if I was making spearmint tea, it would have that nice minty taste. And if I was making lemon balm tea, it would taste very lemony, almost like I squeezed a lemon into the tea. So those are two leaves that I eat. but I eat in a different way. So I actually drink them in tea. So let's go back to our parts of the plant. So here we're back. We were just finished talking about some leaves. And now let's take a look at this part of the flower. So of the plant. Oh man, I was going to ask you, but I already said that it was a flower. This is kind of a weird looking flower because this is a tomato plant. So they have tiny, weird looking little yellow flowers. And this might be a trickier one to think of because in a tomato plant, we don't eat the flowers. We actually don't eat the leaves, the stem, or the root. But there are all these other plants where we do eat those parts. So try to see if you can think of a flower that we might eat. It might be a little bit tricky because sometimes they don't always look like flowers when we eat them. So I've got one growing in my garden. So I'm going to show you a little video of it first. So this flower that we eat is broccoli. And sometimes it's a little hard to see that it's actually a flower because when we eat it, it's just a bud. So the petals are all closed up and it's green. But you can see on this broccoli stalk, and as I zoom out some of the other ones, I left them on the plant too long and they started to bloom. So the broccoli stretches out a lot more and has these bright yellow flowers. So we're actually eating the flower part of the plant. And if we look at the whole broccoli, there's kind of the bunch on top, and we do eat a little bit of the stem too. But the main broccoli part that we're harvesting from our garden is the flower. So broccoli is actually an example of a flower that we eat. And let's see, I've got another one growing in my mother's yard, actually, that I planted there long ago. So this plant is huge. It's really, really big. And there is a flower starting to form on this, and it is a part of the plant that I eat. So let's go in a little bit closer so that we can see the flower growing. And this part right here is the flower, and this is an artichoke. So we peel off the little green parts, so each little green part, and we usually eat the nice flesh off of it. So that's how we eat an artichoke, and an artichoke is the flower, and we usually eat it before it blooms. When an artichoke blooms, all of those green parts open up, and it actually has purple kind of petals on the inside, so it looks like a thistle. So we eat it before it blooms, so it's hard to tell that it's a flower sometimes. And then there are flowers that actually look like regular flowers that we do eat. So here's another one growing in one of my gardens. And this one is called borage. So it's this little purple star-shaped flower at the tip. And borage, you can actually pluck off the flowers and put it in, I like to put it in a salad. It tastes a little tiny bit like a cucumber, a very delicate little cucumber, because it doesn't have that crunch. But you can eat the petals of the borage, and it brings a little color to your salad because it's purple. So it's a very nice, pretty color. And then there's another one that I see in a lot of gardens. I actually didn't have one blooming in my garden, so I went for a walk down my street, and I saw this plant blooming in somebody, like right on the sidewalk. And this plant is a nasturtium. The nasturtium, those bright orangey yellow flowers, you can pluck those and you can put them in salads as well. And the nasturtium flowers are actually a little tiny bit spicy. So those are two flowers that look like flowers, but that you can still eat. So let's go back to our parts of the plant. And let's go to the next part. So we're almost done. There's two more parts. So this is the second to last part. And this is a part, it's most people's favorite part. So let me try not to say the name of it and ask you guys what this part of the plant is. So now you can answer over here. So what part of the plant is this? Is this the tasty part, a berry, or a fruit? And we're looking for the best answer to this question. If I was trying to describe this across all plants, and I was trying to make myself known to somebody else. What would I call this part of the plant? So this one is a tomato plant. So it's actually the tomato, but what part is the tomato? And the function of this part is usually for reproduction. So it holds the last part of the plant that we're going to talk about. But this is how the plant can make more of itself. So it's part of reproduction. So it looks like we're a little split on what we would call this, if we would call this the tasty part or the fruit. So the tasty part, I think this is usually the tastiest part of the plant. But if I was describing this to someone else and I wanted to make myself known, I would say that it's the fruit. So this part of the plant is the fruit. So even though it's tasty, its name is the fruit. And fruits are one of my favorite parts of the plant because usually many of them are quite sweet and delicious. So let's go and take a look at what fruits I can find. So I actually do have a few fruits growing in my garden right now. And sometimes it's a little early to get fruits because we're still in April right now. And so here's a zoom in of one of my plants that grows a fruit. So see if you can think of what plant this is. And I'm going to zoom into, I have 3 planter boxes. So in the next planter box, one of the plants actually has flowers on it. And you can see there's a little green part. So it's growing into the mature fruit that I would eat. And then in the third planter, this one is all ready to eat. So this is a strawberry plant. And the big red strawberry is there ready to be picked. So a strawberry is an example of one of the fruits that I eat from my garden. But I also have some other fruits growing. This one was actually one that I found on a walk through my neighborhood. So I was walking through my neighborhood and I saw this big bush, and then hidden inside is something yellow. And if I zoom in there, I can see that it's a lemon. And this is one of my neighbor's plants, and she was outside and she said I could pick a lemon. So that's why I picked the lemon, even though I was on a walk. So I always ask permission if it's something that's not growing in my yard. I make sure to ask. So I asked and I got to eat that lemon. So she was very, very nice. But lemons are another thing that are around right now because a lot of plants are not quite in the fruit stage yet. They have to grow and they have to flower and they have to be visited by pollinators like bees or hummingbirds or butterflies. And then the fruits start to grow. So lemons and other citrus plants like oranges usually grow in the winter. So I might still see those on the plants right now. But if I look around my garden, I've got some other fruits that are starting to grow but are not quite done yet. So this one is a tree that's in my front yard. And if I take a look, a little bit of a closer look at this, there are these little round balls kind of sticking off all the sticks. They're kind of still greenish. They're kind of like a purpley green color right now. So they're not ready yet. This started blooming a little over a month ago. And now this is an apricot. So the apricots are not ready to pick yet, so they're still growing. But apricot is one of the early season plants that might still be growing. The reason why we can get a lot of these fruits when it's not really time for us right here is because we get fruits and vegetables from all over the world. So we can actually get fruits from warmer areas in the world, and they get shipped to the grocery stores near us. So while I might be able to eat an apricot or a mango or something like that that might not grow in my area right now, it can be grown in other parts of the world that have a different temperature and a different climate. So one that is still just a flower now. So this is one of the latest blooming crops. So this is another plant in my front yard right here. Right now, it mostly looks like just sticks. I have it staked up. So I actually have some sticks there holding up this poor little tree. It's very tiny and it has very long branches. And if I zoom in over here, we can see the flowers. So it doesn't have a fruit on it yet. So it's still waiting to be pollinated. So it's waiting for bees or something to come by and pollinate it so that it can grow a fruit. And if we look at the tag, I can see it is an apple tree. So apples are usually harvested in the fall. So I'm going to have to wait a long time for those apples to be ready. So usually September, October, that's when I would have apples on my tree. But they are very good at being stored in the cold. So if you keep it in your fridge, I actually still have some apples from last fall in my fridge that are still fine to eat. So they store for a very long time. So let's go back. Those are some of my favorite fruits, but there are so many fruits. So I bet you can think of a lot more fruits that you might eat. So let's go on to the very last part of the plant that we're going to talk about today. And that is these little tiny things, and they're usually inside the fruit. So let me go and ask you my last question, which is what part of the plant is this? So you can answer over here. Is this the seed, the nut, or the shell? So it's something that's usually hard, and it's inside of the fruit. And this is what the plant grows from. So this is often hidden inside the fruits to encourage animals to eat it. So if a bird came and ate one of my strawberries, then it would fly around and it might poop the seed out. So that hard little seed makes it through and it lands in the dirt. And then the plant can start growing from that seed. So this is a seed. So it looks like everybody answered this is a seed, clearly. So this is how the plant can reproduce, so it can make more of itself. So that's why the fruit is helpful, because it entices other animals to eat it and then spread the seeds to different areas. So let's take a look at some of the seeds that I eat. And I don't have many growing in my garden right now, but I did find one in my kitchen that I actually harvested last fall. So I have this little bowl of seeds here, and these ones, they're about the size of like the very tip of my finger. So they're kind of maybe a bigger seed. And this is a seed that I usually eat. I usually roast it in the oven with butter, and I harvest it usually around Halloween. So these seeds are actually pumpkin seeds. So when I scooped out one of my pumpkins, I got all of the insides out, it had a bunch of seeds in it. And I took a lot of the seeds and I cleaned them and I put them on a cookie sheet and I roasted them in the oven. So I ate roasted pumpkin seeds, but then I saved some so that I could plant some more pumpkins. And I'm actually going to plant them a little later today. But let me show you what it looked like when they were growing in my garden. And so I have some pictures of what they looked like. So let's take a look. My garden is quite small, so I had to get creative. So it kind of looks like a bended fence. So it's a bit of a trellis, and pumpkins grow on a vine. So the pumpkin grew up over the trellis, and these little pumpkins started hanging down. So this was a good way that I could use up my space, because usually pumpkins will grow along the ground and take up a lot of space. But this way I could still have a place to walk around, and they didn't take up a big footprint because they're growing in the air. So these pumpkins are pretty small, so they're maybe about the size of my head. And these are called sugar pie pumpkins. So I actually ate both the seeds and the fruit of this plant. So I actually harvested the fruit. So I took off the outer skin, and then I cooked the inside of it and boiled it down and turned it into a pumpkin pie. So I ate the fruit and the seeds for this plant. Next, I don't have many other seeds growing, but some examples of other seeds might be a sunflower seed. So here we can see the sunflower, what it actually looks like. And then we can also see the sunflower seeds in a shell. And let me just circle those over here. So here are the sunflower seeds in their shells, or you might see them like you would over here, and these are the shells taken off of the sunflower. So these are nice sprinkled in salads, or honestly, if they have the shell, you can just pop them in your mouth and chew out, and then usually spit out the shell in a good place, not all over the place. So the next seed that you might see are peas. So I don't have any peas growing in my garden, but I do have a bag of frozen peas in my freezer. So if you're looking in your kitchen, you can get creative of where you're looking. Because another example of a seed that I keep in my freezer is corn. So I keep corn kernels. So there are actually lots of seeds that we might eat. So that is my garden tour. So we went through my garden and we saw all the parts of a plant. And if you have any questions, now's the time to pop them over here. And if you want to do your own garden exploration in your kitchen, in a garden, or even just walking down the street in your neighborhood, I have a scavenger hunt sheet on my website that your parents can print out. And you can go on your own scavenger hunt. I also have my drawing of that tomato plant so that you can label it, color it in, and think of even more examples of all of the plant parts that you eat. So let me go over here and see if there are any questions. One of the questions is, how did you grow the basil in the glass jar? So that is actually kind of a funny way to grow them. So when I buy herbs at the grocery store, sometimes they have them in these little plastic cases and they have this little root plug on them. So it's usually some dirt and they've got the roots in there and it helps keep the herbs really fresh. So when I buy herbs like that, I actually usually take them, I take the leaves that I need, and then I put it in the glass jar. So I didn't do anything special with that. I actually bought it from a grocery store and then I saved it and it's been continuing to grow. If I wanted it to grow really, really big, if I wanted lots and lots of basil, I would usually plant it in a pot and put it outside. But some other plants that you can do that with are green onions. So if you're using green onions, you can cut them all the way down to the little white part. And then I usually just stick them in the dirt and they'll start regrowing. So there's a lot of fun things at the grocery store that you can actually regrow. Let's see if there are any. Let's see. So why do plants grow? I've got a question. Why do plants grow? Let's see. Well, that's a good question. I know they need a lot of different things in order to grow. I'm not sure, because we all kind of grow. So starting from that little bitty seed, most seeds need water in order to sprout, which is why I've got those pumpkin seeds there, but they're not growing at all. So they've just been sitting in my kitchen for a really long time. So since I'm going to be gardening a little bit later today, in order to make my seed grow, I usually have to put it somewhere dark so that it can germinate. So germination is called when it starts to grow. So if I take my seed, I poke a little hole in some dirt with my finger, and then I put the seed inside and cover it up. And then I take my watering can and water it. And the water causes the seed to start growing. It usually starts growing down with its roots, and it starts growing up with its stem. And inside of the seed itself, the very first leaves that the little plant grows are the cotyledon leaves. So that's a very fancy word for its very first leaves. So it usually pops out its very first leaves. And sometimes they look a lot different than the other plant leaves. So once it starts growing mature leaves. But those first leaves pop out and allow it to start getting light. So it's getting more things that it needs in order to grow. So then it can grow bigger and bigger. And when it gets lots and lots of leaves and enough nutrients from the sun, from the water, from the soil, then it starts making its flowers. And it waits for pollinators to come by and move pollen from plant to plant. And then those flowers can turn into fruits, and the fruits can grow seeds inside, and we can start all over. So that's why my seeds are growing, is because I'm giving them everything that they need to grow. I'm giving them soil, water, and light. Let's see. Oh, how many types of food can the plants eat? So I guess those are probably the three types of thinking of them as food. So it's the needs of the plant. So I usually think of three main needs of the soil, the water, and the sunlight. And the soil, that's kind of a tricky one because I don't want just dirt there, because sometimes some dirt doesn't have nutrients in it. So I actually use my other farm animals to make really good soil. So my chickens make excellent soil when they poop, and so do my sheep. So I actually take from my chicken coop and where my sheep live, I will dig that up and I will put that into my veggie bed, and that helps the soil be really nutritious for the plants. So that's a really important part of my plant, of growing the plants. Let's see. Why do plants need to grow in the dirt? And that is kind of a cool question because some plants actually do pretty well not growing in dirt. So my little basil plant, even though I do have it just sitting in water, it does have a little bit of dirt in there. But there's a different way of growing plants called hydroponics. So hydroponics or aquaponics is when the plant actually just puts its roots down into water. So it's a really interesting way of growing plants. So really what the plants are getting from soil and other things are the nutrients that are coming in through the water. So if we have, I can't just put plain water there most of the time, or maybe my plant would be a little sickly, but we might say we'd add fertilizer. So there's usually nutrients that we add into the water in those situations to help our plants grow nice and strong. So we might not necessarily need soil or dirt. It's the nutrients that are in the soil or dirt. So some plants actually do grow quite well without dirt. And someone's asking me, do I have plums in my garden? I do have plums in my garden. I didn't see any plums on it. It bloomed, but I didn't see any fruits starting to form just yet. But I do have a plum tree. The other fruits that I have, there's another one that wasn't fruiting just yet. This is one that actually ripens after my apple. So this is the latest fruit in the season that I grow. I usually harvest them in about November, and that's a persimmon tree. So a persimmon is usually, it kind of looks like a miniature pumpkin. It's like kind of flat, and it's very sweet. So I really like to eat it almost like an apple. So you can just slice it up and eat that. So I have a persimmon, I have a plum, I have an apricot, I have an apple, I have a lemon tree and an orange tree. My lemon and orange tree are a little smaller, but I do still have oranges on my orange tree. So I do have a lot of fruit trees. Most of my yard is planted up with fruit trees. So I don't have any lawn because grass for me, that's not something I can eat. My sheep could probably eat it, but I don't have very much space. So I turned all of the space I possibly could into a farm. And it looks like I have answered all of the questions for today. Thank you all so much for joining me. And again, if you want to go on your own garden exploration, there are some worksheets on my website that your parents can print out for you. And if you are doing your own garden exploration, I would always recommend going with your parent, and don't pick anything unless they say it's okay, because some things look a lot like the plants that I showed you today, but they might not be edible, or they might have spines. So sometimes I was actually looking for some berries to take a video of because I don't grow any berries, but raspberries and blackberries grow in a vine and you can see the fruits, but then they're on a very spiny vine. So I always like to go with a parent so that we can ask, is this a safe plant to eat? And especially if they're not our plants, we don't want to pick them without permission. So always make sure you're being safe on your garden exploration. Thank you all so much for joining me. Bye.